The epidemic here is worse than previously estimated, much worse.
The message that's been pushed on us, it's your fault you're fat.
Shouldn't be so hard to get them to run around and play, right?
They have voracious appetites and they don't exercise enough.
It's about how active our kids are.
If you've seen the movie Fed Up, you know that things have gone terribly wrong with the food supply in our country, and even all over the world. Not only are we eating too much food, we're eating and drinking the wrong food. Sugar-sweetened beverages, added sugars in 80% of our food products, and a diet rich in refined grains and other carbohydrates is making a third of our population sick with diseases like diabetes and metabolic syndrome. Even heart disease and some cancers can be blamed on the diet we've been eating over the past 30 years. Who's to blame for this emerging wave of obesity and related metabolic diseases? We've been told that it's our fault for not sticking to the low-fat diet recommended by the U.S. Department of Agriculture through its food pyramid and now My Plate recommendations. We've also been told that we don't exercise enough, but in fact we have followed these recommendations. We've dropped the proportion of fats in our diet and even increased our exercise over the past decade, but it hasn't worked. We're getting heavier and sicker every year. So something is terribly wrong with the advice we've been given. Hi, I'm Dr. David Weed, and over the next 20 minutes, I want to follow up on the recommendations laid out in the film Fed Up, as they would apply to people living in the South Coast, including the cities of Fall River and New Bedford. Our area is already experiencing above average disease rates for obesity, diabetes, coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, and stroke. While the recommendations we're about to hear may seem controversial, they are based on good science and much more likely to lead to healthier lives than following the advice we've been given over the past 30 years that got us into this crisis in the first place. In simple terms, as the movie lays out in detail, on the advice of the government starting in the 1980s, food manufacturers began removing fats from many of the foods we eat. Everything from milk and yogurt to breads, cereals, salad dressings, and even baked potato chips and ice cream have all earned the low-fat designation, thought to not only decrease heart disease, but also to help us lose weight. Boy, were they wrong. With the fats gone, foods were soon laced with added sugars, a form of carbohydrate that's easily absorbed by the body, but if not used for activity, immediately gets stored as body fat. We all thought that it was the fat in foods that was making us fat, when all along it was the carbs. And as the movie points out, even 40% of the people who do not gain a lot of weight on these foods still have gone on to develop metabolic syndrome and diabetes. As we saw in the movie, people who struggle to lose weight eating low-fat foods continue to gain weight even if they exercise strenuously and often. What they don't realize is that the excessive carbohydrates in these foods stimulated their bodies to produce more insulin, which is the hormone responsible for storing unused energy as body fat. In fact, the recommendations of the USDA 30 years ago that all of us should eat 6 to 11 servings of grains, cereals, bread, potatoes, and rice actually fueled the growing obesity crisis. With the help of government subsidies for sugar and corn, wheat, and other grains, food producers followed suit with an abundance of products that were cheap and all so tasty. And we were told that weight loss is all about energy balance. But what we haven't been told is that a calorie is not a calorie if what we're eating is mostly sugar or foods that turn to sugar by the time they hit our stomachs. Today's USDA dietary recommendations still advocate a whopping 300 grams of carbohydrates a day, well over half of what most people can tolerate without steady weight gain. If we wanted to design a program to make the American population fatter, we couldn't have done a better job. Unfortunately, we're now stuck with a food supply that nature never intended us to eat and that has addicted most of the population to eating, so much so that they won't easily give it up. And we don't just eat 3 times a day. Because carbohydrates digest very quickly, we get hungry again in just a few hours. So now we have to snack throughout the day, every few hours, in response to the blood sugar crashes that we experience on this diet. Even our schools have responded with morning and afternoon snacks that simply maintain the carbohydrate addiction. And here on the South Coast, it doesn't help that our culture often reinforces the high carbohydrate consumption. Whether we're of Portuguese or Latino heritage, we are all too familiar with meals that include rice, potatoes, and lots of bread. Add to that all of the pastries, cakes, cookies, ice cream, and other foods that we're moving from the category of occasional treats to standard parts of every meal. And you have a slowly developing crisis in the making right here in our own communities. So now not only are we as overweight and obese as the rest of the nation, the rates of diabetes, heart disease, and some cancers are growing even faster. Right now, 1 out of 5 people over the age of 60 in our area has diabetes. And it's the single biggest reason that people are admitted to our hospitals. While we're doing better at keeping people alive with these diseases, the length of time that they are disabled with these illnesses is increasing as people are getting sicker at earlier and earlier ages. Even our teenagers are getting type 2 diabetes, now the largest medical concern for this age group. So do we just sit by and watch as these problems grow? Or is there something we can do about it? While the solution is by no means easy, if we understand what made it happen, there are some solutions. As the movie Fed Up points out, it took over 30 years to get where we are now, so it's going to take a long time to fix the problem. But we can recall that we were in the same place with smoking 30 years ago. Over that time, we instituted laws, policies, and regulations that gradually reduced the addiction to nicotine to less than half of what it once was. Can we do the same with our addiction to high carbohydrate diets? Here are 10 things we can do.
Drastically reduce the quantity of sugary sweetened beverages we consume. Already, many parents and our schools have gotten the message that soda is no longer on the menu. Unfortunately, youth use their own resources to continue to use these products, many of which are loaded with caffeine and can be very harmful when consumed in large doses. We need to stop offering these at other places where children purchase drinks, such as sports events, festivals, and entertainment venues. We should also recommend limitations on fruit juice and sports drinks, which contain just as much sugar. And how about bringing back free water and bubblers in our parks and public spaces, most of which have gone unrepaired for years. Access to free water should be a right for everyone in every location. In addition, we need to teach people how to recognize and avoid added sugar in their food, which goes by many names. Let's teach people to read the nutrition facts labels so they can limit the total daily amount of added sugars to 150 calories for men and 100 calories for women.
Get more locally grown produce into the mouths of people on the South Coast. A century ago, our area was one of the largest producers of fruits and vegetables, supplying Boston and New York City with fresh food throughout the growing season. 50 years ago, we started growing houses and malls, giving up some of our best land and losing important farming skills and knowledge in exchange for food imported from thousands of miles away. Now, our local farmers struggle to break even. We can reverse direction simply by purchasing local produce, even when it costs a bit more. Every purchase is a vote for local farms and farmers. And in exchange, we get food that is not only fresher, but grown not for its shelf life, but for its taste and nutrition. Buy local is not just a slogan. It's an investment in the future of healthier nutrition.
Stop kidding ourselves that the food we serve to children in our schools is good for them. Yes, most of our schools are now compliant with USDA guidelines for healthy meals, but remember, it was those same guidelines that got us into trouble in the first place. We need to be providing non-packaged, wholesome foods that taste good, provide plenty of nutrition, and teach children what healthy foods are. After all, these are schools we're talking about, where children learn what we teach them about food as well as other subjects. So in addition to buying locally grown fruits and vegetables and preparing meals that do not depend upon the carbohydrates in potatoes, bread, and desserts to satisfy children's hunger, let's get creative and make meals that they not only like, but are good for them. And while we're at it, let's also make sure our hospitals are reducing the carbs in what they offer. It makes no sense to treat people for diabetes, then feed them high-carb meals when they come back for a visit. And our local employers should be encouraged to make those same changes in what they offer as well.
Move away from low-fat and fat-free products. Since the 1970s, we have been taught that fat is bad for us, but that is partially misleading. Recent research does not completely support the once accepted view that saturated fat increases the risk of heart disease and stroke. While trans fats, most of which are man-made, do appear to negatively impact on our cardiovascular health, the other types of fats have not been shown to do so in a recent study. We need to shift our mindset and open ourselves to include natural fats in our diet, foods like nuts and avocados. The Mediterranean diet is a prime example. There is evidence to suggest that the Mediterranean diet, which includes fish, poultry, nuts, and olive oil, may result in less cardiac and stroke deaths than a low-fat diet. The truth is that many processed low-fat foods on their own would taste terrible. To make them more palatable, manufacturers add sugar and lots of it. Now we are beginning to uncover the dangers of excess sugar. Our nutrition labels do not help. Without a percentage of added sugar listed on the labels to guide us, we can easily be fooled by focusing instead on the fat content. There is a movement underway to change nutrition labels to include the amount of added sugar, and hopefully our new labeling will help us make better choices. While fats may not be as risky as we once thought, this does not mean we should turn around and eat unlimited red meat, especially processed meats, which may well have their own negative health consequences. Leaner meats may be acceptable in moderation. It would be best if these animal products were the result of healthy conditions for the animals with more grass-fed and free-range farming. Altogether, healthy natural fats should not be avoided in the same way we have been led to believe in the past.
We need to stop telling people that the way to lose weight is to consume low-fat foods. There are now well over 30 scientifically validated studies that show that diets low in carbohydrates but rich in fats are more effective for weight loss, and people are able to sustain these diets as a regular part of eating. Unfortunately, both the American Heart Association and the American Cancer Society continue to state, watching the amount of fat you eat is important because diets high in fat tend to be high in calories and can contribute to weight gain. While the first statement is partially true, good science and even the most casual observer knows that the second is patently false. If eating low-fat foods is so effective for losing weight, why is nearly everyone battling a bulging waistline? It's time to retire the low-fat diet craze and do something that makes sense to our bodies.
Make some cultural adjustments when it comes to our favorite foods. Many people started eating a lot of starches like potatoes, rice, and bread because they are too poor to afford meats, nuts, vegetables, cheese, and other dairy products. While those starches fill them up, they also create poor populations characterized by overweight and illness. Today, most people can afford to eat better foods and should be decreasing carbs and adding healthier options. In America, we spend the smallest percentage of our budget on food than any other country in the world. Maybe it's about time we spend a little more on what we put in our bodies and less on other pleasures. Otherwise, we'll pay for it in the end, with much higher medical and insurance costs for everyone. For those who cannot afford these foods, we owe it to them to see that our food pantries and soup kitchens serve healthier meals. A number of our local facilities are starting to do just that.
Teach people how to purchase and prepare better foods. The easiest way to eat today is to buy something in a package. Chances are, however, that that product is high in salt, sugar, and refined grains. Selecting real food like vegetables, fruits, meats, nuts, and full-fat dairy products is a start, but you also have to know how to cook. The Fall River Mass in Motion program has produced 6 half-hour video programs that can be viewed anytime online that teach people how to purchase and prepare low-cost healthy meals that don't come in a box or a bag. The Women, Infant, and Children's program, or WIC, also teaches thousands of mothers each year how to prepare healthy meals for their children. And programs like the Diabetes Association also teach people how to prepare basic recipes on a budget.
Stop recommending high carbohydrate diets to people with diabetes. Unfortunately, even the Center for Disease Control teaches people with diabetes that a diet of 150 carbohydrates a day will help them keep their blood sugar in control. That's like telling an alcoholic that what they need is a couple of beers a day to help them control their addiction to alcohol. While not every diabetic can easily follow a low carbohydrate diet at first, everyone should be offered information on how to do it, along with the support that anyone needs to make changes in the way they eat. When they learn that fats are part of a healthy diet, they won't find themselves with the same cravings that they've always had on low-fat diets. And for those who are truly addicted to carbohydrates, we need to offer the same kind of support we provide to those with other addictions.
Let's stop making food a 24/7 opportunity. If people eat small meals throughout the day that include fats and proteins like eggs, meats, cheeses, nuts, and plenty of low-carb vegetables, then constant hunger will not be a problem. And let's take away the candy bars, drinks, and chips and packaged food items found everywhere, like at checkout counters in stores. Even clothing stores sell candy bars at the register. What's that for? And let's stop making food the universal option in our workplaces. There are other ways to be hospitable than to offer food at every meeting, especially when the options are usually the foods that we should only be eating on occasion, if at all.
We need to make exercise a regular part of the day. While we know from research that exercise by itself isn't the most efficient way to lower body weight, we also know that regular moderate exercise is good for us, especially when part of our routine and not as something we do once in a while when we have the time. There is more benefit over the long run from 2 daily 15-minute brisk walks than a 2-hour workout at the gym once a week, and even more so when adding some resistance training to help maintain muscle and bone mass, functional strength, and resting metabolism. The bottom line is that we need to make time throughout the day to be moving, whether at work or leisure. Can we find an alternative to those day-long conferences where the expectation is that we sit for hours on end without moving? People can listen just as well while standing up for a while. And meetings don't have to be in an office when a group can just as easily talk while walking.
So there you have it, 10 recommended changes that can help us change course away from the poor nutrition and sedentary path we're following to a more natural way of living that fits what our bodies need. Of course, we didn't say anything about reducing stress, getting more sleep, or keeping our spirits up with joyous laughter and lots of communal celebration. But let's assume that we're truly in charge of the lives we're leading and not just enslaved by our political and economic structures that we have tolerated for so long. Making changes, even small ones, takes energy, sustained effort, and courage. But the benefits can be enormous, not only for ourselves, but for the generations who will inherit the benefits of our willingness to change direction.